to talk about energy transition from a microseismic perspective, but I focused in on the word risk in the title of your group here. And so as I walk through here, I hope I can hit on some of the ways that microseismic technology in our company is addressing risks in the oil business, both as it's practiced today and as it moves into the world of transitioning to other kinds of energy practice. First, I founded the company in 2003 as a passive seismic service company. Now, passive seismic, you know conventional seismic. Conventional seismic is like an ultrasound. Passive seismic is like a stethoscope. All we do is put a stethoscope on the chest of the reservoir or the earth, and we listen to the squishy sounds that come out when you interact with it in order to tell you something about what's going on. Whoa, that had a timer on it. It's supposed to be discombobulated. Anyway, we built it, we started off, and in fact our very first project, see, it's going to do it again. Our very first project was carbon sequestration monitoring for EOR. And then fracking started, and we got hauled into the world of monitoring fracks. It was like drinking from a fire hose. And we did all of these 50,000 frack stages and worked around the world and stuff. Risk. We have more than almost 2.5 million hours without a lost time incident now. That's unusual for a geophysical service company, and we're proud of that. Well, the frack monitoring business, it took off for a while, but you know what happened to the oil business? That's probably why everybody's interested in CCS these days, because the oil business went away, right? Well, when the oil business went away, our practice changed from helping people design better fracks to get more oil and gas for the dollar spent in the well, to a risk-oriented business of preventing fracture-driven interactions. And what's happening domestically is that now I need to press it the right way. What's happening domestically as we produce these unconventional fields, the wells are getting closer and closer to each other, such that when they frack them, they start to hit the well next door. That's a fracture-driven interaction. And it turns out that we can monitor that, and they need to monitor. Why? Because when you have a fracture-driven interaction, you can get a temporary loss or a permanent loss of production, or you can have the wellbore sheared off. People don't talk about this, but we're doing most of our work now in the Eagle Ford and in the Western and in the Permian Basin, where people monitor in real time. And if we start to see a fault or fracture get reactivated that could cause the shearing off of a well, we raise our hand and they stop. We just finished well, it's not atypical for us in the Eagle Ford for people to skip 10 to as much as 30% of the stages in their well because of the risk of this happening. Now, you imagine doing your economics on a pad of 3 wells and having to cut out up to 30% of the production that you predict. That's a risk that you need to take into account. Well, that has kind of what our business has come down to in the oil and gas side now, is ameliorating that risk of fracture-driven interaction. So what do we do to continue to be in business? Why, we diversify. We have bandwidth. I have people that I need to keep employed. So we've moved into the area of CCUS, as has been talked about here extensively. What is CCUS? You have some kind of a factory, a power plant, an ethanol plant, whatever, that's producing carbon. You capture it, and maybe you stick it in the ground, or maybe you use it. I attended the National Carbon Capture Conference in Des Moines, Iowa. Never been to Iowa before. Anybody been to Iowa? I don't know why you'd go there, except for the National Carbon Capture Conference, but there's a lot of ethanol plants there. And ethanol is one of the most beautiful, carbon capture technologies or opportunities, because the carbon that's produced there, the CO2 that's produced there, is so pure that it's very cheap to capture it, to put away. But interesting talk, and you can take this away. You should learn one thing every day. 8% of the CO2 emitted in the world comes from cement. And there were 2 companies there, the production of cement, 2 companies there who were taking the carbon, sticking it back in the cement, and making a superior grade of cement, a harder cement, that is almost carbon neutral by sticking the carbon back in it. So some people are using carbon, others just want to stick it in the ground. Well, when you stick it in the business is out there, we've heard about this. We did this as a market study before we got into it a couple of years back, and in 2020, that's the orange dot. These different groups all predicted that the carbon CCS business would grow from about $2 billion to as much as $12 or $14 billion by 2025, 2027. This number is so wrong now. After the bipartisan infrastructure bill and after the Inflation Reduction Act, I'd say these numbers are wrong by at least a factor of 2, and you saw things up in 2080 that would be $250 billion. So a real business opportunity. The DOE has gotten into it, $12 billion being invested in domestic CCS, CCUS business development by the DOE over the next 5 years. They have so much money now. The group that administers this has become the biggest department in the DOE within a 6-month period. Like they went from 0 to being the biggest in 6 months. And we, even little MSI, should get a small amount of their money to develop a turnkey passive monitoring system to monitor what happens when they put that CO2 in the ground. So, since the IRA, our phone has been ringing off the hook, not from government or academic agencies as it was before, but now from groups like Thales, and we're even talking to Chevron, if you can imagine. By the way, I can validate what he said about their technical group investing in new technologies. Chevron's venture fund invested in us in 2003 and helped us get off the ground. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So anyway, where does MicroSeismic fit in with the CCS business? Well, when you stick it in the ground, the government wants to know first and foremost that you're not going to create any earthquakes. And even though you're putting that CO2 in the ground at well below the pressures that will cause the rocks to break, it's well known that injecting water, if the fluid volume is such that it builds up in the faults faster than it can leak off into the rock, then those faults will become lubricated. It's kind of like your tire on a wet road. The water in there can cause you to get disconnected from the road. Well, if there's enough fluid in those faults and fractures will be moved by the tectonic stresses that exist in the earth. And if that movement gets felt at the surface, if dishes fall off the wall like they did in Bern, Switzerland, where they put the engineer in jail, by the way, who pulled the trigger. If dishes fall off the wall, we can lose our license, our social license to practice. So first and foremost, they want to mitigate the induced seismic hazard. If we start to see events building up that could lead to a large event, we can raise our hand, they can shut down or reduce the rate of injection, and the tectonics will shut the whole system down, mitigating that hazard, eliminating any risk. We need to confirm that the caprock maintains its seal, its integrity. Now, little tiny seismic events might cause cracks in the caprock, causing some CO2 to escape to the surface, maybe up into the drinking water or even to the surface. It's slow, it's going to be small, but the government is requiring that you validate that that carbon you put in the ground stays there. And if it doesn't, they're going to come back and try to claw back some of your tax credits. So they must monitor to make sure that's happening. And then they want to know where the injected fluids are going. All of the models you'll see show this carbon moving out as if someone were blowing a balloon in the surface. It moves out evenly all around the injection well. That's not how the world works. Geology is different. It's going to follow paths of low permeability, stream channels that are buried, and we need to track where it's going to make sure it's not stepping outside the reservoir. Those are all the things that MicroSeismic can do. How do we do it? We put geophones down into the ground. This is our stethoscope. We drill a small hole, we put these down about 300 feet, we cement them in, we put a radio on the top. I told you this was entirely different than the last talk. We put radios in, and then we or cell phones, and we gather that data back to our center right here in Houston where we process. We have, then this is the block diagram, very simple compared to the ones you just saw. We've got these things in the ground, cellular one. We have an automatic alert, a machine learning driven system that listens to the sounds we're capturing to tell us if something untoward is happening. And if we hear something, then we get into and do some more detailed analysis. There's a protocol called a stoplight system that's become pretty prevalent. If you go to talks on this, you'll hear them talk about this. Green, we're listening, we don't hear anything untoward. Yellow, ooh, it's a little bit dangerous. We're going to raise our hand and say we need to do some extra analysis. Red, reduce the pumping rate. Something bad could happen. We want to mitigate that hazard, prevent the risk. EGS, nobody's mentioned that tonight, but when it comes to energy transition, this is my favorite. I don't like solar panels. I don't like wind turbines. I like that big nuclear reactor that's sitting about 2,000 miles beneath my feet. I like that as the source of cheap power. And it turns out that we know, we've been doing it for years, we can pump water down into the hot rocks, bring it back up, harvest the heat. This business is now starting to catch people's attention, and they're talking about there's enough electricity here, 500 gigawatts of electricity that could be harvested from these enhanced geothermal systems. Now, we're not talking about pumping water in through a closed loop through the hot rocks and harvesting the heat. That's been shown to be pretty inefficient and not going to work. What we have to do is frack the rock and create a bigger surface area for the fluids that we pump down to hit the rock and get warm. Well, I used the word frack. This is exactly the same technology that we used to create the unconventional wells. And what's happened with the downfall of the oil and gas business, or the decrease in that, there have been a lot of well-educated frack engineers who've come onto the market. And they're taking the technology that we developed in the unconventionals and porting it into this business. EGS has been around for a long time, not done well. The opportunity exists to take what we learned in the oil business, apply it here, and do well. And that's exactly what's going to happen. The number of wells they're talking about going to get drilled in this business, you can see how it's going to grow. This is Rystad's figure over the next few years. A real serious opportunity. But when you frack, you're going to worry about whether or not you're going to create earthquakes. You're going to worry about whether or not the fluid is going to come back up to the surface. And microseismic monitoring, we do it exactly the same way. We put those geophones in the ground, we listen to the squishy sounds, and if something untoward is happening, we raise our hand. We also, in this case, help them design a better frack to make that heat chamber more efficient. I just wanted, because of the word risk in your title, I wanted to show you one other risk that microseismic is addressing, and it has nothing to do with energy transition. So, well, the bar's not open, so you have to listen to it. And it's sinkhole early warning. You may not know, but sinkholes in the United States and around the world, sinkholes cause a lot of loss. In fact, I think, what is a sinkhole? A sinkhole is where the ground falls out under. This is from down in Chile about a month ago. A large sinkhole fortunately didn't open up under that mine, and so nobody lost their life. This is a picture from a couple of years ago where a Corvette museum in Indiana, the bottom dropped out into a sinkhole and they lost a bunch of Corvettes. Oh, shucks. But in fact, the numbers are actually quite astounding. 15 years, $4.5 billion in damage from sinkholes. And this is again something where microseismic contributes to the reduction of risk. So a sinkhole in section view, the carbonate rocks down deep will dissolve. Those could be salts as well, creating a void in the subsurface. And the pieces of overlying rock start to fall into that void, and the cavity grows upward. They call that chamber as it grows upward an oven, and it grows upward till it daylights.